Other star-filled nights, another full moon, and I wonder where you are.
Welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to see such a substantive, high-quality audience here. So let's start this very first panel in the conference on Max Weber and the social sciences. It will be a panel on law, the sociology of law, and as he just said a couple of minutes ago talking here, it's strange to know that students of law usually do their business without Max Weber, and students of Max Weber very seldom think of the law. So I think it's very pertinent to open this conference with reflections on the sociology of law. We'll have a presentation by Duncan Kennedy from Harvard University with comments by Alberto Pupo. It's really a great pleasure and a great honor to have you here, Duncan. Duncan Kennedy, who is Carter Professor of General Jurisprudence at Harvard University, is one of the eminent students of the law and legal theorists in the US. He's co-founder of what is known as critical legal studies. Outside academia, he is perhaps best known for a very incisive critique of legal education in the US. The book is Legal Education and the Reproduction of Hierarchy. And here's, if you look at his website, his work, it's really an impressive body of publications, reflections, and also teaching work, and an impressive range of subfields, including legal theory, legal history, law and economics, and also the sociology of law. His talk today has two titles. I'm not sure whether we have decided yet whether to talk about the paradoxical role of law in Max Weber's general social theory, or the second title is on the disenchantment of formal legal rationality. So thanks a lot for being with us. The floor is yours.
It's an honor, it's an incredible pleasure to be here in Mexico City at CIDE and at the Colegio de Mexico tomorrow. I've only been to Mexico City twice before. It's an amazing experience for me to come here. It's a very attractive place, which affects me a lot. My presence has an odd quality, which is this. This is a conference on Max Weber and the social sciences in the 21st century. So I am not a Max Weber scholar. I'm not a social scientist. And I am a person of the mid-20th century, not the 21st century. So it's very strange. I will try to perform as though I was all the other things instead. So let me say right away that this presentation is about the appropriation of Max Weber, very much as was said in the introductory remarks. Max Weber, from my point of view, is a body of extraordinary writings waiting to be appropriated for different projects. In order to understand what one says about Weber, I think it's very important to understand the project. So my project could be called a left critical legal project. So it's left in the sense that I'm interested in Weber because he has, from my point of view, many insights that are helpful in developing the critique of contemporary world capitalism, of the contemporary world system. That's what I want to get out of Weber. And for me, he's most of all significant to help understanding the way in which ideologies, systems of ideas, and modes of thought can reinforce hierarchies which, although they are sociologically legitimate, are morally or ethically illegitimate. So for me, Weber is a great critical social theorist, although he was not himself a person who would have sympathized particularly with the mode of left existence that interests me. So this is not an attempt to be true to Weber's politics, but to appropriate his genius for a purpose somewhat strange, certainly, to him. So, the title, Paradoxical Role of Law in Weber's General Sociology, or the Disenchantment of Logically Formal Legal Rationality. Here the idea is to come to grips now, speaking as, now not as a leftist, but as a jurist, as a law professor, that we jurists are not at the core of Weber's studies. So this is also a jurist's appropriation of a sociologist who has mainly been of interest to political scientists, sociologists, and historians in general. So from a legal point of view, Weber's work has a very odd aspect, which I'm going to take as my starting point, which is that Weber, in Economy and Society, in his general sociology of law, defends as the only alternative, the only realistic, but also the only intellectually respectable way to do law. He defends as the only respectable way to do law a mode of legal thought, which he calls logically formal legal rationality, which today is regarded in legal theory and among elite jurists in every country as completely of no interest, exploded, and invalid intellectually. So Weber, now, because more people have come in, I'm now going to interrupt my speech here and ask for a little audience participation, because now I want to know who I'm talking to before I get into this deeply technical discourse. So how many of you are undergraduate university students doing a first degree? A first university degree? No. Do you not have your headphones? So how many of you are university students? Now we're talking. How many of you are professors or assistant professors or researchers? How many of you are Mexican? Okay, great. So now back to Max Weber. Is this microphone working correctly? So Weber defends something that is often called legal formalism. He defends legal formalism, and he gives a definition of it, which is a very classic definition, which would have been agreed in his time by people analyzing legal thought, which is a notion that there is a very sharp distinction between law making and law finding, or adjudication of disputes, or legal interpretation. So on the one hand, there's law making, on the others, there's law finding, legal interpretation, adjudication, that the process of legal interpretation in Weber's idea, which is the idea of his time, classical or formalist legal reasoning, is to take the text, the raw, bare text of a norm that's been enacted by lawmakers. So the lawmakers give you the norm, and the norm's interpretation is supposed to be the logical interpretation of the meaning of the norm to deal with a new factual situation. So interpretation produces a new interpretation, a new version of the norm, but it is strictly legal, based on the internal logic of the norm, and what it does not have is any extra juristic influence. The idea is that the jurist is simply a mechanical operator of a legal logic, which is not personal, it has nothing to do with his preferences, and it's also not social or substantively rational because it has nothing to do with whatever people in society think is good or bad. It doesn't matter whether it's a Catholic country or a Protestant country. It doesn't matter whether you're a socialist or a right-wing capitalist. All those things are irrelevant to legal interpretation, so anyone can do it because what it is strictly internal. And it's based on the idea, it presupposes that the legal order produced by the lawmakers is coherent, so that the combination of the idea of the coherence of the order, combine that with the idea of a purely logical method, means that law is a science. So that idea is no longer, since the 1930s, and in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, up to today, that idea still has some adherence. But as a sociological matter, we would say the closer you are to the center, the world center, or any national center, the less likely you are to believe in formalism. Formalism is a recessive, marginal, leftover belief of jurists who are not sophisticated. And that means both in a transnational context and in a local context. So in the, students of law, jurists in Mexico who understand themselves to be the Mexican juristic elite, have appropriated not one but two critiques of formalism, and they reject it. So the situation is Weber is strongly supporting a position that now seems implausible, and the question for the first part of my presentation is to be, why would Weber support this idea? So first, a few words about the critique of this idea. The critique of this idea begins in the 1880s and 1890s in Europe, then it's taken up on the continent in Europe, and it's taken up in the United States. So it's basically a German, French, Italian, American critique of legal formalism, which is never fully accepted in England until much later, or in Britain. And the basic critique says something like, it is wrong to think that you can presuppose the coherence of the order. The order is neither coherent, and because it's not coherent, there will always be gaps. There will be empty spaces. There will be places where legally formal reasoning simply doesn't work. And those places are frequent. Moreover, juristic practice of formalists abuses deduction. So this category is crucial to the modern sociology of law. The jurists of the tradition of legal formalists who claims that it's all legal logic, that the law finder or interpreter or judge is not personally involved, and that social values other than legality are irrelevant, the people who make that claim constantly have to lie or mislead us to make it plausible. That is, because they think that's the situation, when they interpret, they claim pure legal reasoning. But in fact, because there are gaps, they have to pretend to logically close the argument when in fact there was a gap and no logical solution without appealing to extra juristic values. So let me say that again. Abuse of deduction is a crucial category in the modern sociology of law, as done by law professors. The idea is the judge is told that he is an impersonal, legally logical interpreter of norms that come from above, from a lawmaker. He's not a lawmaker. He must not make law. He must simply operate legal logic on the law made by someone else and apply it in reality to the facts in a way that is completely unrelated to his personal ideological, political, moral, sociological views, and also to general ideas about morality, religion, good policy, or utility. They're irrelevant. All that's relevant to the judge or the interpreter is the law, the law, the law, and its logic. To preserve that idea, they lie, mislead, deny, and mislead themselves, because you can't do it. So it's an impossible task. There is cognitive dissonance, if you know that phrase, between what they're told to do, or role conflict. They're told to do it that way, but it can't be done that way. It's impossible to do it that way. And every sophisticated lawyer knows that. Professors, judges, and lawyers know that you just can't do it, but you've got to say you're doing it. So the system is based on saying that it's logically tight, when in fact it's logically loose, and pretending you have a conclusive logical legal argument when you don't. Often pretending to yourself. You may be deceiving yourself. So this is a basic idea of the critique, and Weber basically says that may be true, but it's irrelevant. He doesn't deny that it's possibly true, but he says, listen, this logical method is the only good one we have. Without it, we would be in terrible trouble. Now, I want to interpret this position of Weber's, which is against the modern mainstream way that jurists think about law. But first I need to say, many lay people all over the world still believe that judging is like that, or think it could be like that, and if it's not like that, it's because of crime. Whereas the critics say, when judges diverge from strictly logical reasoning and pretend that they're not diverging, it's because they have no choice. The question is undecidable. There's a gap. It's indeterminate, but they're told they have to make it sound determinate, that it's decidable. So it's not their fault. They can't use logic. There's no logical purchase. It's not their fault. They're denying or lying, that's their fault. But all you could ask them to do is to say frankly what other moral, political, sociological, economic, political considerations they're using. They can't be doing what they say they're doing, but they couldn't do it. They couldn't do what they say they're doing. It's impossible. So this is a situation in which the consciousness of elite jurists, and I'm talking about the centers, the global centers and national centers, so including Mexico. So when I've been to 2 legal conferences in Mexico, at UNAM in each case, the law professors were divided between the people who fully incorporate this critique, who were at the most prestigious law faculties, and the ones who weren't. So there's a divide in the legal culture. Among lawyers, there's a divide in the legal culture. And that's true in the United States too. The further you are from New York or Los Angeles, the more likely people are to believe in the formalist model. So it's true, it's a global phenomenon. So, okay, now that's the end of my brief introductory to the paradoxes of modern legal consciousness. So modern legal consciousness is paradoxical in this way. So now I want to switch to a different question, which is why was Weber committed to this idea? And here I want to introduce the idea of the iron cage of modernity in Weber's general sociology. So Weber's sociology deals with religion, politics, economics, science, art, and sex. Religion, politics, economics, science, art, and sex. Although the general presentation of Weber understates or de-emphasizes the role of art and sex in Weber's general sociology. And I'm going to try to fight that. Remember, I'm not a Weber scholar, so I don't care what Weber scholarship says about this. art and sex are everywhere in Weber, and life is much more interesting if that can be incorporated. One of the ways Weber has been ruined for modern audiences is by leaving that out. And I think I need to congratulate right at the beginning the organizers. The password for the participants in the conference to have access to the papers about Weber is Richthofen. And that's a reference to Weber's mistress, the sister of one of the great sexual artistic genius figures of the pre-World War I period in Germany, the wife of both Alva and the lover of D.H. Lawrence. So Weber lived on the verge of right on the boundary lines of the artistic and sexual revolutions of his time in Germany. So here's the theory of the iron cage. The theory of the iron cage is that religion used to organize everything and give life meaning. It explained why life in the world was a morally meaningful enterprise in which there were right ways to behave and wrong ways to behave, presided over by a God preoccupied with the justice of people's conduct. So that in some basic way, who you are was given meaning by the way you performed morally in a God-given order. That was the enchanted universe. So the progress, now this is very rough, and progress of both science and also political organization in the economy and the state have made it, have destroyed the plausibility of the direct intervention of a holy order giving life meaning, and the possibility of belief in direct a design by God or miracles, either designed by God or miracles that guarantee the order. Everything turns out to be better explained by cause and effect than it is by divine plan and divine intervention. And in the political domain, it turns out that what happens is over and over again the function of superior bureaucratic political organization over other modes of organization. In this universe, normative order, the norms of religion, divine right of kings, the norms of even, let's say, natural rights of man, have lost their quality of the sacred, of the holy, and of the charismatic ability to emotionally, cognitively seize you and inspire you. So it's a world that's become bureaucratized and routinized across the domains of politics, economy, and science, all of which were wrapped into religion. And the result of that is that religion hasn't disappeared, but religion has become something about mysticism and sects, rather than not sex, but sects, that is sectarianism, not sexuality. So the great churches which organize politics and everything else, politics, economy, and science, the great churches are gone, replaced by many little groupings based on individual, usually mystical beliefs of tiny groups of people. According to Weber, this is horrible. In both the economy and in politics, it means that freedom, autonomy, individuality, creativity, the possibility to live a full and meaningful life is gone. More and more and more is just gone. But there's something left. And what's left is art and sex, not sects, but sex. So art and sex have survived disenchantment and rationalization and bureaucratization as the domains in which first a responsible man has to be loyal to his vocation to pursue religion or politics or economics or science. You have to be true to it as a good pursuer of the Protestant ethic of commitment to an ethical course, but it's no longer inspired. It's emotionally reduced to a grinding willingness to sacrifice yourself to that cause, But over here, we have art and sex. So art and sex in private life are a potential way to live still after the end of the possibility of a full life in religion, politics, science, or the economy. Now, in his theory, those bad domains are bad because they're bureaucratized. And to be bureaucratized means that people organizing bureaucracies are just as present in the economy. The large corporation and the state apparatus are bureaucracies. The university is a bureaucracy for science. The state is completely bureaucratic. The economy and the university and religion is still bureaucratic when it is not mystical and sectarian. So bureaucracy is based on the idea of the distinction between the lawmaker and the law finder or interpreter. The idea of bureaucracy is in the bureaucratic order, everyone is below the law. The bureaucracy is a law-governed, rule-governed organization in which the people who execute the law, the very people I've been talking about, the law interpreters, whether they're petty officials, judges, or law professors, all of these people in the bureaucracy have as their role the interpretation of the legal order. That's what they do. They interpret the legal order. So in that mode, if in fact Weber were to accept the critique of legal formalism that was becoming dominant and is today universal, he would have had a problem with his most basic large structure. In the most basic large structure, our tragic situation is we are impotent pursuers of a vocation which has been disenchanted with just this compensation on the side. So it's a very modernist view. The alienation of life in civil society with these redeeming, irrational elements that can make it all right, that when you get up in the morning, you go to the office and you are at best a high-level administrator of an order that you had no part in creating. So, he has an investment in legal formalism. It preserves his understanding of the tragedy of the modern life of the sophisticated man. So this is a way to understand the psychological, political, ideological motivation of a theoretical formula, which is legal formalism. Legal formalism is good. It's for its part in this larger picture. So Richthofen is completely appropriate password because it alludes in the work of Weber to an effaced dimension. Personal biographies of Weber, there's a great book called The von Richthofen Sisters, which is a cultural description, biographies of the two sisters, or maybe they're three sisters. I guess there were three sisters. So to get it, in other words, to understand Weber, I think one has to understand that view. That view could be said to be the opposite of the typical view of the New Left. So I said I was a creature of the 20th century, the mid-20th century. As a 68er, a person of 68 myself, people with that set of beliefs are, from my point of view, terribly misguided because of their belief in the absolute immovable logic of the institutions and bureaucracies and the impossibility of challenging them, and their belief that sex and art are the marginal private recompense for public passivity. So this is also a political critique of the politics of Weber that are embedded in those sociological categories. But now, for the next part, now how long have I been going?
25 minutes.
I've gone 25.
Yeah.
So for the next part, very quickly, one of the things that's great about Weber is that Weber provides the basis for a critique of these aspects of his own general sociology. Because Weber is a theorist of the iron cage, disenchantment, rationalization, and bureaucracy. That's his view for both socialist and capitalist orders, with all that's left is art and sex. But Weber is also a decisionist. So at the same time that he's a theorist of bureaucracy, he is a theorist of the limitations and impossibility of the very bureaucratic order he is describing. These two elements in his theory are not ever brought together, but they're both very powerful elements of the theory. So in both politics and economics, and even in science, Weber believes that you can't get rid of an irrational moment of inspiration, insight, risk-taking, daring, and willingness to defy, to understand what happens. So famously in science, no amount of bureaucratic science will produce creativity. You just can't get away from that. So the great scientist turns out to be the person who knows when not to follow the bureaucratic order. In the political domain, politics, after rationalization of both legislative politics and electoral politics, it is still the case that it's about fighting and charisma, and it's not possible to reduce it to disenchanted order. For the economy, robber barons, entrepreneurs, monopolists, ruthless colonialists, and nationalist mobilizers for great power rivalry in the economy all defy the logic of the economy, of the disenchanted, rationalized economy. So Weber has a very powerful critical attitude at the same time that he has a passive and despairing attitude. He is a decisionist, as has often been recognized, as well as a theorist of rationalization and bureaucracy. Those ideas applied to logically formal legal rationality, to legal formalism. Eventually, it was this aspect of Weber's own model which was appropriated by critics who he rejected to generate the model, the current models of mainstream legal thought. So that's the end of the setup for the past. That's Weber's theory of legal formalism in Weber's general legal sociology, which both reflects his iron cage and also his decisionist view. So the last part of the talk, which is the last 15 minutes.
10 plus minutes.
10 plus minutes. Is about what elite mainstream jurists made of the problem of the disintegration of legal formalism. So now this is going to be a very legalist law professor part, and I know that there are probably very few of you for whom that is an easy vocabulary. So I'm going to try to explain slowly a current mode of legal discourse, of legal thought, which is a major aspect of legality as done by judges, law professors, and lawyers of the elite variety today, and which is deeply influenced on law professors who are legislators as well. So here's the idea. A great deal of law is made by judges and other interpreters. A very large part of all the legal rules are made by judges and law professors who have prestige and legitimacy with judges. And that's true in Mexico, very strikingly true in Mexico, but it's a global phenomenon, a well-known global phenomenon, which is the juridification of politics, the extent to which judicial lawmaking is everywhere. Judicial lawmaking is done according to a discourse of lawyers, a legal discourse, that admits that there are lawmakers in the legislature, but professors and judges, and actually practicing lawyers, are also lawmakers. And they make law in many different ways, but one of the ways they make it is through the model of policy analysis or proportionality or balancing. These are three words for the same legal procedure: policy analysis, proportionality, or balancing. So jurists in this mode think they can legitimately choose a new rule, make a new binding legal rule and enforce it through the courts by looking at all the relevant moral, political, economic, and institutional considerations that a rational legislator would take into account, and then looking at them as in conflict, recognizing that the moral reasons will some be moral reasons for one rule, some moral reasons for a different rule. There will be rights arguments that these are the rights that are being infringed by this interpretation of the rule. No, those rights are protected. These contradictory policies then will have to be put together in a global legal judgment based on their balance, their integration. Totally similar in many, many ways to the classical ideas of rational legislation as balancing. This is not to choose an outcome. It's not Qadi justice. It's not to choose an outcome. It's to choose a norm. And the norm will apply to many fact situations, and it will apply differently to every fact situation. So you have to choose a norm that, as applied to many fact situations, gives the best result. It'll be good for some fact situations, less good for others. You have to make the norm broader or narrower. So the norm, the legal norm in this experience, is a compromise. It's like a statute after a hard-fought legislative battle. The norm is a compromise. Judges make norms that represent compromises. However, and you might say, what has happened to the separation of powers? So now here's the answer to what has happened to the separation of powers. In this model of the process, judges are still distinct from legislators for three reasons. The first reason is they can't do this procedure. This legislative balancing policy analysis is only permissible when there's no legally formal answer, no teleological answer, no statute that directly applies, no precedent. So it's understood as the policy of last resort, a last resort. You can't do it. It's not legitimate to do it unless there's nothing else you can do. However, of course, it's possible that this will be incredibly high stakes. So the famous American case of Bush versus Gore is a case that required policy analysis. The judges said they had no choice, but the stakes were the presidency of the United States. So these cases where there's no alternative can be really, really important cases, and they have to be done by policy analysis. As part of the process of legal reasoning in this mode, lawyers and judges attack the claims of their opponents that there is a rule. That is, it's built into the process that the critique of the possible legal solution is part of the practice. So lawyers and judges destroy the formalist arguments, the precedential arguments, the statutory arguments of their opponents to create this space in which they can do policy analysis, if they think that will be good for their cause. So it's not the same as legislation. You have to show that you can't resolve the question formally before you can do the legislative consideration, but you can spend your time creating the gap that you are then going to exploit. Next, the policies are understood, the policies, rights arguments, natural rights, welfare arguments taken from neoliberalism or institutional economics, moral arguments, which could be individualist or solidarity-based arguments, are understood to be inside law. So you're not going outside law. And the third thing, so it's a last resort, the arguments are understood to be inside law, not outside law. And the third thing is they have to be universalizable. That means you can't use arguments that are understood to be partisan or political. This is a Habermasian element in the theory. So the idea is you can't use religious arguments. If it's a secular state, you can't use religious arguments. If it's a Catholic state, you could use Catholic arguments, but you couldn't use Protestant arguments. So you can only use arguments that are understood to universally apply. So you can't use the argument that women should have more rights than men in a state that has an ideology of equal rights. You can't use a racially explicit discriminatory argument. Those are not universalizable. They don't apply equally on behalf of everyone. So these restrictions supposedly make it different. Now, this legislative procedure of judges is understood to be legitimate in modern democratic political theory by the judges and the law professors on the grounds that it involves value judgments. Yes, it involves value judgments, true, and you might think that the value judgments needed to be made only by the legislative or political authority, but such arrangements have been shown to need to be relativized. That is, the distinction between the judge and the legislator can't be, it is not plausible intellectually, historically, or logically to claim that judges cannot legislate. They have to legislate because the law runs out. And at that point, they can either lie or act irrationally. If they're not going to lie or act irrationally, what they're going to be doing is legislation. So the question is how much judicial legislation, and that's a factor in the policy calculus. That is, the question of the political legitimacy of judicial legislation is part of the policy calculus. There are policy reasons in favor of permitting judicial legislation and policy reasons against it, given that it is inevitable and that it involves value judgments. So the basic structure of the discourse of the jurists has incorporated the objection that they are doing something wrong when they do judicial legislation. So the core of jurists, elite jurists all over the world, in the centers nationally and transnationally, understand themselves as entitled to perform this political function on the grounds that there are no alternatives, in spite of the fact that it's a value judgment. So the overall situation of contemporary legal thought is that Weber's formalism and the teleological jurisprudence of his critics and the English system of casuistic precedent, all of these modes of legal reasoning are still present, with a residual mode, which is policy analysis or proportionality or balancing, within which the elites self-consciously adopt the role of legislators, but all the legal discourse designed for people outside the core elite is still in the language of legal formalism, denial, misrepresentation of the system as legalist. So this is a professional core exercising a key political function with a public ideology of submission to law, but a collective professional ideology which strongly asserts their own political legitimate role, even in cases of the greatest conceivable political consideration. So, where are my cards? Zero.
Almost zero.
Wrapping up. Wrapping up. So, this is a leftist argument. It's a leftist argument for the following reason. It's the argument that political power in modern global society is exercised in ways that mystify the roles of elite actors who have deep commitments to the system. So the elite jurists are deeply committed to the system. They have a role in the system that, from the point of view of democracy, looks at least normatively or ethically questionable and arguably illegitimate, because it is very much like the role of economists in Marx's political economy. It is an apologetic legitimating explanation of how it is tolerable to live in a society that is ruled by the combination of judges and the interests that are behind the overall organization of the system. But it's not directly leftist. You could believe the critique and be a rightist. You could believe the critique and be a centrist. It's an attempt to contribute to the understanding of the current sociology of law through a Weberian ideal type. So what I offered was an ideal typical representation of policy proportionality or balancing in modern legal thought, trying to use Weber's specific ideal typical methodology to produce a new ideal type, which I don't think, by the way, is controversial. I think most jurists would agree with my description. So the argument is Weber's ideal typical method here is essential. It's the only method that works, but it's very important to disentangle it from Weber's specific sociology of law, which turns out in this argument to be an inadequate development of his own method, because in order to save the iron cage, he had to deny in his analysis of legality the decisionist or irrationalist or charismatic dimensions of his own interpretation of politics, economy, and science. So to save that image of himself, which is he's just a good soldier serving the good in a disenchanted world, but can go, has his mistress and art and the Richthofen sisters, he was willing to sacrifice the application of the method across the board. But we, who, in so much as we understand ourselves as leftists, should understand politics, economics, and science as domains not of submission to a disenchanted, rationalized bureaucracy, but as domains of struggle for power, not to be denied. Thank you.
Since this one is not working, may I take the microphone back?
Thank you. Thanks a lot to this very insightful talk. You really made us think about the paradoxes of disenchantment, of legal disenchantment. So let's move to the comments by Alberto Pupo, who is a professor at the DAM, at the law department. He holds a PhD in analytical philosophy and legal theory from the University of Milan. And he has published on diverse topics, but probably mainly on states of emergency and on human rights in the international sphere. Thank you, and the floor.
Muchas gracias. Y quiero disculparme con el profesor Kennedy porque preparé mi comentario en español. Do you have the machine? Y quiero también rápidamente señalar a las intérpretes que hice algunos cortes para hacer la presentación más breve, así que pueden, quizás saltando algunos párrafos, seguir siguiendo el texto que les entregué. Bueno, antes que todo quiero agradecer a los organizadores, al CIDE y al Colegio de México, y en particular a Álvaro, que ha conducido esta organización de forma brillante y eficaz. Bueno, ahora la tarea de comentar un texto de un autor cuya contribución a la teoría del derecho contemporánea ha sido y es fundamental, pueden imaginar que no es una tarea fácil. Muy a menudo en eventos como este, un seminario, el comentarista juega el papel de crítico, la tarea se vuelve bastante fácil, a veces divertida, cuando existe entre el autor y el comentarista un auténtico desacuerdo. En mi caso, lo confieso desde ya, no existe ningún desacuerdo, así que la tarea fue realmente difícil. De hecho, la sensación cuando terminé de leer el artículo que me envió fue la siguiente: me habría gustado escribirlo yo. Así que la tarea es difícil, pero como siempre uno encuentra por lo menos el pequeño punto que, si no es una crítica real, por lo menos puede generar una réplica interesante. Comenzaré brevemente con recordar algunos momentos que considero fundamentales en la argumentación del profesor Kennedy. En primer lugar, los contemporáneos de Weber, representantes del antiformalismo, tenían buenas razones para pensar que la racionalidad lógico-formal era una descripción no plausible de la forma en que el razonamiento judicial realmente funciona. En segundo lugar, se subraya que Weber se rehúsa a hacer frente al fracaso de la racionalidad lógico-formal. En tercer lugar, parece por lo menos, que se acusa a Weber de haber acusado a la crítica antiformalista de ser un conjunto de reacciones irracionales. Hasta aquí se trata de un diagnóstico, por un lado de la postura de Weber, por el otro de una cierta situación que pone en tela de juicio el modelo de racionalidad lógico-formal al cual, por así decirlo, Weber no quiere renunciar. En la etapa siguiente, el profesor Kennedy reconstruye una forma de retomar el reto weberiano a partir de un lúcido reconocimiento de la realidad. Se trata de una manera de formalizar el razonamiento judicial, inevitablemente creativo, en particular en virtud de lo que se conoce como el policy argument. Según Kennedy, se trata de una formalización de una racionalidad sustantiva. En fin, en el último párrafo de su artículo, el autor termina sugiriendo que los estudios críticos, en su versión escéptica, han probablemente consistido en la reinvención o la adaptación para finalidades no compartidas por Weber de herramientas weberianas, de herramientas críticas weberianas. De lo que precede surgen dos comentarios. El primero me limito a mencionarlo, el segundo lo desarrollaré un poquito más. El primero se refiere al carácter sustancial de la racionalidad formalizada por el policy argument. No desarrollaré este punto, pero creo que es posible brindar una explicación del argumento de la policy sin recurrir a valores sustanciales. ¿Cómo? Aceptando sencillamente que los jueces, como el Parlamento, son auténticos legisladores. Lo que se racionaliza no son valores sustantivos, sino la expresión de una voluntad creadora de derecho. La racionalización basada en el carácter universalizable de las soluciones libremente o casi libremente establecidas por los jueces tienen como función la de neutralizar la crítica que consistiría en afirmar el carácter arbitrario de la práctica judicial. Arbitrariedad que llevaría lo que Herbert Hart llamó una pesadilla. El segundo punto que desarrollaré se refiere a la postura de Weber en cuanto a la racionalidad lógico-formal y en particular a su reticencia o clara oposición frente a la posibilidad de renunciar al modelo. Puedo formular una duda genuina de la siguiente forma: ¿es realmente reprochable la actitud de Weber? A continuación sugeriré que el reproche, que creo por lo menos indirectamente formula Kennedy, no está justificado. La sociología del derecho se basa muy a menudo sobre la observación del derecho que nos es más familiar. Weber está contagiado por la cultura jurídica del positivismo formalista. La sociología del derecho es, también la sociología de Weber, inevitablemente una sociología del derecho situada en un contexto sociopolítico que no puede trascender la cultura, los ideales y también los miedos del sociólogo. El valor de la predecibilidad, de la calculabilidad, es fundamental para Weber. Una forma de satisfacerlo es una organización burocrática y, más importante, la aplicación de la ley sin interferencias valorativas por parte de las autoridades que aplican el derecho. El argumento de la indeterminación, que comparto, no aplicaba, en mi opinión, con la misma fuerza con la cual aplica hoy. En la segunda mitad del siglo XIX, y por lo menos hasta antes de la Primera Guerra Mundial, la Europa continental occidental es tendencialmente burguesa y liberal. El dogma de la soberanía nacional parece intocable. los valores dominantes son todavía los valores relacionados con la legalidad y la autonomía privada. En donde se hace sentir claras fuerzas sociales antiliberales, estas, probablemente con la excepción del marxismo, tienden a buscar un fundamento a partir de la estructura liberal. El fenómeno de la indeterminación radical, de la cual habla, por ejemplo, el filósofo finlandés Koskeniemi, es tendencialmente ajeno a este mundo. Este modelo probablemente se desintegra o muestra sus profundas fallas con la Primera Guerra Mundial y con la crisis económica de 1929. Pero es plausible, creo, aceptar que durante la vida de Weber, el ideal racional de la legalidad y el modelo del juez racional no tiene por qué cuestionarse. No estoy queriendo decir que se trata de un buen modelo, todo lo contrario, sino que, para utilizar una expresión wittgensteiniana, tal modelo brinda una buena imagen del mundo, una buena imagen a partir de la cual muchos de nuestros juegos lingüísticos adquieren sentido. Kelsen es un buen ejemplo de ello. A pesar de que el modelo formalista no capture la realidad, la Grundnorm kelseniana sirve para vivir y describir el derecho como si el modelo fuese viable. Aunque, como sabemos, el último Kelsen, el Kelsen realista o irracionalista, solo reconozca a la Grundnorm el carácter de una ficción. Otra razón es la siguiente. El mundo jurídico global está bien lejos, durante la vida de Weber, de cumplir con el ideal racional del Estado burocrático basado en la legalidad y la racionalidad lógico-formal. También en este caso estoy de acuerdo que tal ideal es inalcanzable, pero la realidad más cercana a Max Weber juega probablemente el papel de un laboratorio. En países sin una sólida tradición de common law, la ley y su aplicación racional y mecánica por parte de los funcionarios es la única esperanza que puede proteger en contra del particularismo que ha caracterizado el derecho europeo del antiguo régimen y, en el caso de Italia y Alemania, por ejemplo, que ha caracterizado el derecho también después de la Revolución Francesa. Italia y Alemania tuvieron que luchar para la unidad durante el siglo XIX. En donde el principio de legalidad nunca se ha impuesto realmente, como en Italia o en México, el desastre institucional en términos de calculabilidad y predecibilidad es manifiesto. Todo lo anterior, me parece, puede explicar la actitud de Weber. Sin embargo, si Weber no merece un reproche por su fetichismo respecto de la racionalidad lógico-formal, puede imputarse a su actitud probablemente un defecto quizá más grave. Lo que hizo Weber fue quizá más política que sociología del derecho. Convencido de la importancia del valor de la predecibilidad, la descripción inadecuada, ya que en esto comparto perfectamente el punto de vista antiformalista, de las conductas de los jueces a partir del modelo de la racionalidad lógico-formal, es el disfraz para una genuina ideología política, para una genuina teoría política normativa. La racionalidad impone un modelo institucional basado en el imperio de la ley, la supremacía del legislador. Es la mejor forma de reducir la arbitrariedad cuando, como es el caso en países sin sólidas virtudes judiciales, los jueces no tienen la costumbre de motivar realmente, es decir, de realmente justificar sus decisiones. No es sin importancia, creo, destacar que la práctica de la motivación de las decisiones judiciales existe en Inglaterra desde el siglo XII, cuando en el viejo continente el juez seguía considerando a sí mismo como una suerte de sacerdote portador de la verdad jurídica. Hay que preguntarse en conclusión por qué la mirada sociológica, tan lúcida en otros ámbitos, no ha llevado al autor alemán a abandonar la racionalidad lógico-formal relativamente al derecho y en particular a su aplicación por parte de los jueces. Resumidamente, y voy a terminar antes de que expiren los 5 minutos, creo, por 2 razones, a ver si hay un premio. Una de las cuales, por lo menos, me parece plausible. Si no es desde un punto de vista teórico, por lo menos desde un punto de vista histórico o pragmático. La primera razón es que los jueces en Alemania, como en muchos estados europeos que han codificado el derecho durante la vida de Weber, de hecho pretenden razonar lógicamente a partir de la ley, de los códigos. La segunda razón, una vez aceptada la crítica antiformalista, esto es, que los jueces no son para nada agentes lógico-racionales, consiste en destacar que en una fase de construcción del Estado de Derecho, como era Alemania durante la segunda mitad del siglo XIX, el hecho de insinuar que la racionalidad lógico-formal es una mera ilusión, ya que no juega ningún papel o un papel muy escaso en el razonamiento judicial, habría implicado un costo socio-jurídico demasiado importante. En efecto, la situación en la cual desarrollan sus teorías críticas los realistas jurídicos americanos, escandinavos, italianos y en general los critics, es una situación caracterizada por el dominio del formalismo jurídico que se ha renovado y se ha hecho más maduro después de los ataques antiformalistas conocidos por Weber. El formalismo ya no es, para utilizar una expresión de Brian Leder, el formalismo vulgar del siglo XIX. En los países en donde impera la crítica o el realismo jurídico, las bases del Estado de Derecho están más que sólidas y por lo tanto ya no existe ningún riesgo de derrumbe. La crítica puede y debe ser feroz, ya que el mismo crítico sabe que la cultura de la legalidad, de la cual es inevitablemente parte, puede renovarse, hacer autocrítica, pero de ninguna forma dejar lugar a una cultura premoderna. La cultura de la legalidad, con su racionalidad instrumental, puede incorporar todas las sectas, y no el sexo, o acaso incorporar algunas y ridiculizar otras. Muchas gracias.
As completely of no interest, exploded, and invalid intellectually. So Weber, now, because more people have come in, I'm now going to interrupt my speech here and ask for a little audience participation, because now I want to know who I'm talking to before I get into this deeply technical discourse. So how many of you are undergraduate university students doing a first degree? A first university degree. No. Do you not have your headphones? So, how many of you are university students? Now we're talking. How many of you are professors or assistant professors or researchers? How many of you are Mexican? Okay, great. So now back to Max Weber. Is this microphone working correctly? So Weber defends something that is often called legal formalism. He defends legal formalism, and he gives a definition of it, which is a very classic definition, which would have been agreed in his time by people analyzing legal thought, which is a notion that there is a very sharp distinction between law making and law finding, or adjudication of disputes, or legal interpretation. So on the one hand,
Another star-filled night, another full moon, and I wonder where you are.
Welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to see such a substantive, high-quality audience here. So let's start this very first panel in the conference on Max Weber and the social scientists. It will be a panel on law, the sociology of law, and as you just said a couple of minutes ago talking here, it's strange to know that students of law usually do their business without Max Weber, and students of Max Weber very seldom think of the law. So I think it's very pertinent to open this conference with reflections on the sociology of law. We'll have a presentation by Duncan Kennedy from Harvard University with comments by Alberto Pupo. It's really a great pleasure and a great honor to have you here, Duncan. Duncan Kennedy, who is Carter Professor of General Jurisprudence at Harvard University, is one of the eminent students of the law and legal theorists in the US.
The 21st century. So I am not a Max Weber scholar. I'm not a social scientist, and I am a person of the mid-20th century, not the 21st century. So it's very strange. I will try to perform as though I was all the other things instead. So let me say right away that this presentation is about the appropriation of Max Weber, very much as was said in the introductory remarks. Max Weber, from my point of view, is a body of extraordinary writings waiting to be appropriated for different projects. In order to understand what one says about Weber, I think it's very important to understand the project. So my project could be called a left critical legal project. So it's left in the sense that I'm interested in Weber because he has, from my point of view, many insights that are helpful in developing the critique of contemporary world capitalism, of the contemporary world system. That's what I want to get out of Weber. And for me, he's most of all significant to help understanding the way in which ideologies, systems of ideas, and modes of thought can reinforce hierarchies which, although they are sociologically legitimate, are morally or ethically illegitimate. So for me, Weber is a great critical social theorist, although he was not himself a person who would have sympathized particularly with the mode of left existence.
He's co-founder of what is known as critical legal studies. Outside academia, he is perhaps best known for a very incisive critique of legal education in the US. The book is Legal Education and the Reproduction of Hierarchy. And here's, if you look at his website, his work, it's an impressive body of publications, reflections, and also teaching work in an impressive range of subfields, including legal theory, legal history, law and economics, and also the sociology of law. His talk today has two titles. I'm not sure whether we have decided yet whether to talk about the paradoxical role of law in Max Weber's general social theory, or the second title is on the disenchantment of formal legal rationality. So thanks a lot for being with us. The floor is yours.
It's an honor, it's an incredible pleasure to be here in Mexico City at CIDE and at the Colegio de Mexico tomorrow. I've only been to Mexico City twice before. It's an amazing experience for me to come here. It's a very attractive place, which affects me a lot. My presence has a odd quality, which is this. This is a conference on Max Weber and the social sciences that interests me. So this is not an attempt to be true to Weber's politics, but to appropriate his genius for a purpose somewhat strange, certainly to him. So the title, Paradoxical Role of Law in Weber's General Sociology, or the Disenchantment of Logically Formal Legal Rationality. Here the idea is to come to grips now, speaking as now not as a leftist but as a jurist, as a law professor, that we jurists are not at the core of Weber's studies. So this is also a jurist's appropriation of a sociologist who has mainly been of interest to political scientists, sociologists, and historians in general. So from a legal point of view, Weber's work has a very odd aspect, which I'm going to take as my starting point, which is that Weber, in Economy and Society, in his general sociology of law, defends as the only alternative, the only realistic, but also the only intellectually respectable way to do law. He defends as the only respectable way to do law a mode of legal thought, which he calls logically formal legal rationality, which today is regarded in legal theory and among elite jurists in every country